Joining us is Lavindran Sandragasu from PricewaterhouseCoopers Taxation Services Malaysia, who will be sharing his expert insights on the recent tax-related announcements from Budget 2026. Lavindran, thank you for being with us here today.
Thanks, Azrin, for inviting me on the show.
Our pleasure. Now, let's start with your overall impression. What are your general thoughts on Budget 2026?
So I think in any budget, there's a balance that requires to be made between fiscal discipline or fiscal consolidation, which the Prime Minister has mentioned before, versus the growth that the country requires to move forward. So I think in terms of fiscal consolidation, one of the most important areas that the government was looking at to address was the fiscal deficit, which I believe the government in this budget very carefully has managed to keep the fiscal deficit at about 3.5% moving forward for budget 2026 versus a 3.8 in the previous year. I think the move is also in line with the Malaysia Plan 13, which is to bring the fiscal deficit to around 3%. So I think the direction taken by the government is consistent in budget 2026. Now, of course, there are new revenue streams that needs to be put in place in order to ensure the fiscal deficit can be reduced, right? So I think we have seen that also recently in the introduction and expansion of the sales and service tax on certain goods and services. On the other side, in terms of growth, I think what Budget 2026 has done is there's had been an increase in development expenditure by almost, if I'm not mistaken, around 50 billion. Quite a bit is for development projects, which is to incentivize public investment in the economy, as well as Budget 2026 is also focused on very specific areas for growth and has incentivized those areas in Budget 2026. So I think from that perspective, budget seems to be a balanced, thoughtfully made sort of budget for 2026.
That's an interesting overview. Now, let's dive a little deeper into whether it met people's expectations. Do you think this year's budget lived up to expectations, or were there areas that could have been improved or included?
Okay, it's quite a tricky question because it depends who you ask, right? In terms of whether this was a budget that was, maybe if I could put it, preferred. But I think for me, one of the areas that maybe could have been addressed a little bit more was the tax to GDP ratio that is in the budget. So tax to GDP ratio essentially means the amount of tax collected versus against your GDP of the country. So Malaysia has been in a little bit of a decline in terms of the tax GDP ratio. And this is when you even compare to some of our regional peers, the rate that Malaysia has is quite low, right? And given the level and size of the economy, I think more can be done in this particular area. And this ties in with fiscal discipline, of course, but at the same time, strengthening the, if I could call it, the balance sheet of the country in order to make sure growth can be sustainable moving forward, right? Because in order to have growth, the country would have to borrow as well. And in order to borrow, you'd have to be able to finance those borrowings. So to some extent, tax collection, tax revenue, and non-tax related revenues will have to also be in line with that kind of growth and that kind of borrowing that needs to be in place for development to take place in a sustainable manner. So I think that's one part I would say that maybe a little bit more focus could have been made on that.
Right. Now, Lavin, one measure that stood out to many Malaysians was the new tax relief for local tourism. That's a new 1,000 ringgit tax relief for entrance fees to local attractions and cultural events. Now, could this genuinely enhance domestic tourism, Lavin?
Okay, so we had something similar like this during the COVID period. I think it was between 2020 and 2022, the same amount, 1,000 ringgit, but it was predominantly used for accommodation, entrance fee, as well as domestic tourism packages. I think the slant this time is, I think, predominantly in terms of cultural programs, as well as entrance fee for theme parks, etc., etc. Now, I think as Malaysians, like to travel and go on holidays, etc., and I think a lot of the places, particularly for kids and children to go to, has some kind of entrance fee, be it a theme park or a museum or a cultural event, and some of these costs, I think, has increased. Some of these fees. So I think this relief will be well received, if I can put it that way. And now whether it actually sort of tips the coin in order to really push people to go for the holidays and go for these kind of events, again, I think we'll have to wait and see. But I think it's definitely a good incentive for individuals and families to take this benefit.
That's a great point, Lavin. And now, digitalization was also a key theme this year, especially for small and medium businesses. SMEs will now receive an additional 50% tax reduction for training in AI and cybersecurity. Now, how significant is this step for promoting digital adoption?
So I think for MSMEs, right? So micro SMEs in that definition, I think every single dollar counts, right? And some of these AI training programs are not quite cheap. Are not cheap. I think there are some programs in terms of AI leadership, etc., which I understand can be around 8,500 ringgit per course per person. And so for micro SMEs who are, really have to tighten their belt, these costs are fairly substantial. So I think any relief, and this is, if you incur 100 ringgit, you get an additional 50 ringgit as a tax deduction. And I believe that, it will go down well. Particularly in the environment where we are, where AI is, a definite need, at least from a training perspective and understanding how it can be used for business. So this initiative, I think, will go down well.
That's insightful. Now, on transport, Lavin, tax exemptions for taxi and e-hailing drivers who buy Proton or Prodo vehicles will remain in place. Now, would you say this is a positive move for the gig economy?
Yes, I believe so. I think the taxi drivers have many a time put forward their grievances in terms of increased costs of operating their taxi services. When it comes to even maintenance, etc. And there's a lot of competition when it comes to transportation sector. So I believe that this initiative would go down well, and it'll be much appreciated for the taxi service providers. Because some of these costs are fairly prohibitive in some instances if you do not have this exemption in place. So yes, definitely, I believe that this is a good initiative.
Lavin, we're actually running out of time. Quickly now, could you explain the carbon tax that's being introduced next year and what kind of impact it might have?
Okay, so the carbon tax being introduced is going to be done in phases. Focus is going to be on iron, steel, and energy producing industries, because they seem to be the highest producers of greenhouse gases. Now, I think the rate has not been decided yet, but definitely for these industries, there will be a certain level in which the greenhouse gases are produced, and anything over and above that level, the taxes would be applied on it. So for example, in Singapore, the level of production, anything above 25,000 metric tons of CO2 or greenhouse gases, anything above that limit will be imposed a 5% tax as part of the carbon tax. So I would imagine if that's the same approach Malaysia is going to take, again, I'm not sure about the levels yet, but that could be an indication of where the carbon tax is going to go.
Right. That's a great insight, Lavin, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. That was Lavindran Sandragasu, tax partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers Taxation Services Malaysia, giving us his input on Budget 2026.